here. Good evening and welcome. I didn't put out any notices or promotions for my mini live streams. I should probably start doing that. It would probably help the channel a little bit. Anyway, I feel obliged to put more and more notices on the channel, going live and just putting stuff out there because of this. You've all seen that. Every show I have, I put it up there. So right now the moon is still in Gemini. Let me just double check a couple things over here. Give me a second. I'll be right back. Sorry, I'm just messing with some software and a bit of information. Yeah, I thought so. Okay. So I got my notes. With Jupiter approaching the middle degrees mark of Gemini, the pressure on Saturn is just increasing. Okay, so there's this big fat square. In astrology, it's a very, very tense aspect, in terms of whatever you want to call it. Geomagnetic influences, how one planet affects another, and how we experience that geomagnetic influence here on Earth in our physical three-dimensional lives. Our body, our mind, and our heart and our soul. Because all of that is contained in here. Obviously, for most of us in our waking lives, everything operates from the neck upwards. If you're doing heavy manual labor, or everything that you do is manual labor, there's more sort of coordination with the rest of the body. If you're doing activities that basically involve the head and the hands, which is a very common way of being these days, then it's a little bit disjointed, but it's still body, mind, heart, and soul. And we are receptors, just like a planet, just like a plant, just like a whale, a butterfly. We are influenced by the geomagnetic forces. Right now, as some of you know, the world, planet Earth, is having a lot of upheaval at the moment because the magnetic pole shift is very active, and it's gone kind of pretty far off the way it's been for a long time. And that pole shift, it's not the actual axis of the Earth. Okay, hold on a second. I just want to do a little quick something so we don't confuse people. Hold on. So this is the Earth, and it has a 23-degree tilt. Okay, that's pretty much more or less stable. But what is unstable? See, this is the polar axis over here. But what is unstable is the magnetic pole axis. It kind of swivels around this point here. Okay, this point. So up at the top of the North Pole, for example, it doesn't really have a very specific spot. It wanders around. And that's because of the liquid and the boiling lava and molten iron at the core of the planet. It's all inside here, it's all sloshing around as we wobble around the sun. And as we go around the sun, this thing here occasionally does a bit of a wobble. And we feel it here as massive, global upheavals, climate, earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, tornadoes, drought, flooding, whatever, all those things. And then you add Uranus in Taurus on top of that. It just amplifies the craziness. Like you probably noticed recently that a lot of wildlife has been struggling with its navigations. The big stories are things like whales, bees, certain birds. But they're all affected because they they don't have compasses like the way they don't hold compasses in their hands. They have geomagnetic compasses kind of hardwired into their DNA like a GPS. Anyway, it's all very disturbing because they end up like as beached whales or way off course, and they end up starving and dying because they don't go back to their traditional breeding grounds because the pathways didn't make it. And it's very sad, but this is nature. I wanted to comment on a few things. I don't know if you've noticed, it's different for everybody. When there's a lot of Gemini energy around, I get pretty, let's say, overstimulated. Overstimulation of the nervous system. Jittery. It's like having too much coffee. Something like that. Everyone has a different experience. I'm just conveying mine. And during that time, it was amplified, especially by the moon transiting through Gemini, which is where it is right now. The moon is right at the tail end of Gemini. And over the last few days, it was traversing through Gemini. And during that transit, it crossed over Mars, and then it crossed over Jupiter. Simultaneously, the moon came into a square, then a hard square, then a soft square with Saturn in Pisces. Hello, Necessary Truth. I'm just doing an afternoon rant to clear the air a little bit. Sorry, hold on. All right. Boo Boo, are you okay? All right. I think Boo Boo saw a ghost. We have ghosts here. We have ghosts. Over here right now, in the house, in the studio, there is the ghost of a chicken. A small backyard chicken type of chicken. Not a wild chicken, but like a little chicken that was used for eggs. There's the ghost of a small chihuahua and the ghost of a very small baby pit bull. And every now and again, Boo Boo gets these visions. He sees them and he starts to, pick up on them. And sometimes it scares him. Sometimes it's exciting for him and it's fun. But most of the time it's very disorienting because he can't actually grab them when he plays with them. But those ghosts are kind of mischievous. Anyway, during this last few days, the Gemini energy has been extremely activated because of Saturn in Pisces hard squaring with Gemini. Pisces and Gemini are natural squares to each other, depending on how tight the degrees. At some point, there was an exact square between the moon and Saturn. It's a soft square with Mars. It's a pretty soft square with Jupiter, but it's going to get very harsh, very hard, very, very soon. I'm thinking, in fact, over the next 28 days or so, when the moon comes back to Gemini again, things are going to be much more tense. The reason I'm mentioning it is that it really helps to be aware of these things. From my perspective, I'm just sharing my opinions as an astrologer. What's happening is the concentration of Gemini energy, Mars, Jupiter, and the moon, we're putting a lot of pressure on the Saturn in Pisces retrograde energy. The way I translate that is that the language of truth, the words of truth, the communications of truth, the light of truth, the natural tendency for people in general to prefer truth over non-truth, the tendency of people to want to naturally converse and share information in order to evolve and grow, constantly filtering out what's real, what is not real, 24/7, all around the world, all day long. You've probably noticed that social media and mainstream media are enormous components of our day-to-day lives, whether we like it or know it or not. A lot of people check in on local, regional, national, international news every day because they want to know what's going on. It's like, birds hanging out. Every morning they gather. In the evening they gather. And then hence Twitter was born. Now it's called X. So there you go. But anyway, what I feel has been happening, and I've shared this before in previous videos, is that Saturn in Pisces retrograde at about 18 degrees is putting extreme pressure on the truth and holding anyone and anything, like an institution, a bank, a governor, a parent, an individual, a communicator, mainstream media, alternative media. Saturn in Pisces retrograde is basically calling it out, with the message being, think of it like a massive check engine light on your car that's blinking, 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 very, very, very bright, multiple messages like, you need to check up what you're doing because you're way out of alignment and you're going to destroy your own vehicle. Okay? And there are people who are operating that way in the world right now, most notably the elites and what I call them or they, or the owners of the world, or the globalists, or the New World Order, whatever you want to call them. It's a small cabal who basically own and operate everything. And they want to keep it that way. And they know, they're acutely aware that their empire is shaking to the point of imminent demolition. And they're trying to prop it all up by using more and more and more and more and more unhealthy exploitation of the Neptune energy. Instead of divinity, inspiration, art, beauty, compassion, healing, love, universal love, unconditional love, they tap into the hollow, unhealthy expression of Neptune, which would be things like lies, betrayal, deception, bribery, corruption, murder, crime, disease, imprisonment, psychological operations, mind control, manipulation, propaganda, anything and everything to obstruct the truth and create a veil of deception, a very, very beautiful veil of deception, so that the elites can continue to operate and propagate their evil agenda above and beyond Pluto and Capricorn, 29.59 degrees. In my perspective, it's destined to fail, but they're not going to stop because it's equivalent to death as far as they're concerned. So they're pushing everything to the absolute limits. We've already talked about Neptune in Pisces at the 29 degree of crisis. That's ongoing. I'm focusing on Saturn in Pisces retrograde right now. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and it will be very clearly defined in terms of Saturn. It'll be just like living a 30-year examination period, and then you come in for the test, and you take the test. Is it a pass or a fail? Where did you pass? Where did you fail? It's an accountability, and that's what's happening at the depths of the Pisces, Neptune, Saturn retrograde thing. And as we can tell, it's really bad. It's really, really bad. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And that's what's happening. Everything has gone wrong. It's because everything in the armory of the elites is being used for nefarious purposes. And it's being held accountable. Most notably in the places of leadership around the world, on all the hotspots. You know, like the Middle East with the Arab-Israeli thing, in Europe with the Russia-NATO thing, in Southeast Asia with the China-Taiwan thing, in America inside with the left-wing, right-wing thing. So it's all happening, and it's like a war. It is war. It's very, very warlike. Mars is not in its full expression yet in the square. Eventually Mars is going to make a hard square to Saturn, and then it's going to get violent. If you think there's a lot of violence right now, it's going to increase. It's essentially the last remaining form of expression available to the common person who feels that they have been betrayed by their lords, their owners, their elites. And there's nothing else to do, so you resort to violence. Desperate people do desperate things. With the Jupiter in Gemini thing, it's showing the sheer scale, the astronomical, massive scale of deprivation, of perversion, depravity, sickness, disease. Think of the Saturn in Pisces retrograde as not only the warning lights on your dashboard, but actually the computer printout when you're doing the diagnostic on the car to figure out what the hell is wrong with this car. It's not just a Mercury retrograde, it's a full-blown Saturn retrograde. So the problems are very deep and very, very serious. And so what's happening is, what we're seeing right now is the actual events going down a checklist of Saturn retrograde. And the checklist would correspond to a list of everything in your vehicle of life that is non-operational or dysfunctional or has been trashed or abused. Like trashing your car, driving over too many potholes, not doing your oil change, trying to add nitro to the fuel to make it go faster even though the car is getting older and older. Trying to paint it so it looks really fancy, but in fact it's a piece of decrepit junk. So on and so on. Anyway, it's red lights flashing alerts, and it's going to increase, okay? Because we're only starting the deep dive right now. I just want to rattle through a few things. Most of you are aware by now that we've had 2 spectacular assassinations in the last 24 hours. One of them was the Hamas leader in Iran. He was hiding out in Iran, thousands of miles away from Gaza. And by the way, he's got billions stacked away. I wonder how he got that. Anyway, he was assassinated in his home. Well, not home. He was assassinated over there in Iran. And on top of that, the Hezbollah leader was assassinated in Beirut, in Lebanon. Hold on, I see a load of retracted messages. Oh, I didn't see any of that. Hi, necessary. Sorry, I wasn't. Okay, all right. So anyway, those 2 assassinations sent very, very, very big alarm bells, especially to America, the Jewish community, the Arab Islamic community, and so on. And in my opinion, what it says is really, really simple. It's like there's little tiny Israel on the map, and there's tiny, tiny, tiny Gaza, and it's turned into a bloodbath. And it's retaliation on top of retaliation. I don't know when or if it's ever going to stop, because it's been going on for thousands of years. Arabs and Jews, Jews versus Arabs, and so on. And this is just another day in the life. On the other hand, this is a very serious one, because Israel decided, you know what? We're not just going to send over a few drones and pop off a few, random military ops and arms depots or whatever. We're going to assassinate the leader of this Hamas were going to assassinate the leader of Hezbollah. And so it's like it's two very powerful, very tactical shots. It would be like having a kill shot here, okay? And it's kind of sent shockwaves because Iran and all the proxies are now thinking like, well, wow, what are we going to do now? They're starting to run out of options in Iran because they're getting closer and closer to the point where in the process of retaliation, you get closer and closer to having nukes. So I don't know where this is going to go, but it's very scary. Also, it sent a very simple, blunt message to the Islamic, Arab, Muslim world that Israel is not willing to tolerate what's happening as far as they're concerned. There's a lot of grievances on both sides, so I don't know what to tell you about that, but Israel made it very clear, we're not messing around. We are not messing around. If you want to continue to play dirty the way you're playing dirty, we will play dirty on a whole other scale. And that's what they did. It's very scary. I think of it as very much to do with the Mars and Gemini right now. I can't quite explain it, but I think it's to do with the fracturing of people's abilities to find solutions outside of violence. Normally we would have things like diplomacy, meetings, agreements, Gemini stuff. But Mars is there right now, so it's making it very, very, let's say, pointed, weaponized, aggressive. More extreme violence inside the United Kingdom, Great Britain, England. Massive riots unfolded off near Liverpool. My sister used to live around there for a while. And basically what happened, this kid in a local community, I think he was about 17 or something, went into a little... No, it's not. Mars and Gemini isn't violent on its own. What I was trying to say necessary is that there's heavy squares going on. And when you're under that much tension, the healthy expression of Mars would become unhealthy. In other words, instead of trying to talk through a situation, you just go, you know what? Boof! I hope that makes it clearer. I should have said it that way in the first place. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. So, this kid lived in the neighborhood, went into some little children's event at a little children's dance, ballet and dance sort of party club thing or whatever it was, I'm not sure, but it's for the little kids. And there were lots of little kids there, and the murderer was about 17, and I think he killed 3 little girls and wounded about 18 others. And things got very bad very, very quickly. Once the word got out, the locals figured out that this person who did the attack looked like an immigrant, a migrant, perhaps an illegal migrant. So the situation got very ugly very quickly, and a lot of far-right nationalists came in from all over the country very, very, very quickly to start off a riot and attack certain communities. And they're not talking about it in England right now. They're not openly declaring or making it big headline news that the little kid looked like a non-white British citizen who took out a bunch of little white kids. Apparently there's some confusion because apparently the murderer is actually born and raised in England. It's just that he looks like one of these illegal migrants. So I don't know. It's very scary. Very scary stuff. More violence. We talked about this yesterday. Civil war has broken out in Venezuela. It's essentially a military coup. The military has basically gone against its own government. And it's very fractured. It's getting very, very ugly because the vote, the election, turns out was completely bogus. And the guy Maduro, who claims he won, has met immediate backlash because there was another group that felt very confident that they were going to win because of all the polling and the numbers in advance. And that didn't happen. The guy Maduro, who was already in charge, decided, I am going to continue to be the boss, and I can tell you for a fact that the election actually told the world that I am the elected leader. Excuse me, I dropped my pen. And so that turned into massive riots, and then that turned into martial law and effectively a civil war of Venezuelans against Venezuelans. Very, very frightening. And from the sources where I go, it's perceived that the whole point of the election, well, not the point of the election, but the intention or the flow and the direction of the election was to bring in this new person. I can't remember who they are. And that new person would represent a much more free, open market type of economy, pro-capitalism, pro-West, pro-health, pro-abundance, pro-freedom, and so on and so on. And that was orchestrated by the CIA because the CIA wanted to have a friendly leader inside Venezuela that would be very receptive to Western-style corporate privatized industry coming in and out and doing very active, successful business. And why would you ask that? Who gives a doo-doo about Venezuela? You know, I'll show you. All right. There's Venezuela. It's about the size of Texas, a bit bigger. It's about the size of Texas and Oklahoma strapped up together. The thing about Venezuela and why the CIA, which is the USA, which represents the global corporations and the global elites and the global banking system and so-called free market global economics, the appeal of Venezuela is that they have the world's largest reserves of oil and gas and gold. Makes you wonder. Maduro didn't want that to happen. Maduro wanted it all for himself. And of course Maduro is very close to Joe Biden because Joe Biden is buying oil dirt cheap from Maduro. And Maduro is basically enriching himself personally and screw Venezuela. That's basically the formula. And the Venezuelan people are sick of it because Maduro is essentially operating an extreme communist regime and has destroyed Venezuela. Completely destroyed it. It's very sad. So much crime, poverty, chaos. And I started to watch some of the videos and I kept thinking, wow, the United States is one step away from Venezuela. Anyway, that was a lot of violence too. It's very, very disturbing. Next, to do with a lot of violence. Sorry about going on and on about the violence, but I feel it's a very important theme. If I feel very agitated, I'm not feeling violent myself at all. I'm just feeling the, overstimulation of multiple Gemini, Mars, Jupiter, and Moon in Gemini. And when the Moon transited, I became very unsettled, very queasy about everything that's going on, because you could just sense and smell the violence going in the background. So, you've probably heard all about the United States Secret Service is being deeply investigated now, or at least the early stages, by Congress in the United States, because Congress and the United States people want to know what actually happened at the Trump assassination attempt. Because obviously what happened is that it was, let's say, perhaps it might have been organized. Perhaps it might have been a whole deep state, operation. But the thing is, it went wrong. So a lot of the feeds that I'm seeing, the closer you get to mainstream, there's less and less expression about some of the material that is a few layers deep in the alternative media, where there's a lot of content from witnesses and whistleblowers that indicate very clearly that, from their opinion, the whole assassination was not a single kid who wanted to go on a martyrdom trip and become the world famous assassin of a former president. That was the cover story, because underneath there were other shooters strategically placed, and there were strategically designed miscalculations to allow Thomas Crooks to take his shots. It's so ludicrous. What's coming out is so pathetic. It's so ludicrous. And the chances are a lot of people wouldn't have asked so many questions if the shooter was successful, because they would have attributed the whole thing like it's some wacko psycho kid. He probably got groomed by a bunch of radical left-wingers, and pop, 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 there it is. That's the story. It's over. Donald is gone. But it didn't work. It didn't work. And so the deep state is scrambling. Oh my God. We screwed up the easiest assassination opportunity in the world. So the Secret Service is being held accountable. And as far as I can tell, the Secret Service is complicit. Willful negligence. Willful dereliction of duty in order to facilitate and enable the young kid Crooks to do the to act out his part in the movie. The whistleblowers have come up with stunning stuff, including some of the local police back there in Butler. And the Secret Service is trying to deny, delay, deflect any kind of accountability. And that just makes it look even worse. There's this guy Josh Hawley, there's Jim Jordan, there's Kennedy. They're operating like attack dogs. Attack dogs going after what needs to be gone after, especially the deputy director of the Secret Service. So it's very, very scary. I would not want to be the director of the Secret Service right now, or anybody involved in that government group. And one of the most, pathetic, shocking, disturbing things, new footage just came out today that shows Thomas Cook on the rooftop from a view behind stage left of Donald Trump. In other words, you could see right over Donald Trump and his head and his shoulder all through the crowd, and then about 100 yards in the distance you see the roof. And then you start to see, oh my God, there's somebody on the roof. And they're just walking along, hobbling along, trying to hide. And then they duck out of sight for a while. And then they go down and they hide at the end of the roof line. And then they pop up their head again. They start looking around and they hide again. Now, if the people in the bleachers and the seats can see this, then I guarantee the snipers on the roof can see crooks. Guaranteed. So why didn't they take him out? That's the other question, is why was Trump allowed on the stage at all? Obviously, the whole thing was a massively orchestrated setup. In other words, the snipers were probably told to stand down, do not take out Crooks until Crooks has let off a few rounds and had a chance to knock out Donald. Of course, you're not allowed to say that, but that's sort of what it looks like. And this new footage that just came out, it's very hard to argue with it. Remember, the people in the bleachers are probably about 20, 30 feet below the snipers. The snipers could see crooks. Okay, there's more shenanigans going on as well. I want to leap forward a little bit into August. We have a Leo new moon coming up. I think it's going to be very strong energy. And I think it's going to, let's say, trigger, what's the word? Okay, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think it's going to be favorable for Donald and JD. I think Donald Trump and JD Vance are going to enjoy this Leo new moon, new starts and new beginnings, because they have astrological aspects that are very harmonious with the Leo energy. So I think it's going to be beneficial for them. On the other hand, we've got Aquarius, Taurus energy. Even though it's not going to be hard squares, at some point it'll be a hard square that is very conflicted with Leo. And why do I mention that at all? Because that Aquarius, Taurus polarity, well, it's not, the Aquarius Taurus is a hard square. Sorry, the Aquarius Taurus aspect is borderline Capricorn Taurus aspect. And so in terms of the geometry, it looks very harmonious between Pluto and Uranus. And that's still going to be there. And that's going to support through the sextiles to Neptune in Pisces 29 degrees. So all these critical degree crises points. And I have a feeling it's going to be awkward, very awkward for all the people, in other words, the elites, who are exploiting the benevolence of the planets right now, because that triangle that I've showed you on the screen the other day is a trine with two sextiles connecting it. So it's very strong, very supportive energy. It's beautiful in its own right, and it's also very easy to exploit that for nefarious purposes, and I think that's what's going to happen. And I think the Leo energy is going to call it out. One last thing, and I'll leave you guys alone, is that some of these Secret Service whistleblowers on the inside are basically dropping hints, especially to some of the sources where I watch, which tends to hide a few layers behind the mainstream. They don't want to be too visible on mainstream anywhere. But these couple of Secret Service whistleblowers. They're in the inside, and they've got their connections with some of these, let's say, alternative media, and they're saying, please, please understand. There's a lot of chaos right now, but things are going to get worse because the elites, the Dems, all of that, Kamala, Joe, Biden, Hillary, they're desperate. They are so desperate that they're trying to manipulate the movie to such an extreme that people are going, this is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. These polls are utter lies. These shows, these utter lies, it's just bullshit. And the whistleblower basically said they're going to try it again. They're going to do everything they can to try and take Donald out again. So, because they're literally running out of options. They've got, what, 93 days, 95 days until the election. So the show is not over. The pressure is going to increase. And then even then on the day, if Donald is still alive on the day of November 5th, you can guarantee there's going to be some kind of massive distraction, whatever it is, to upend any kind of legal, fair, honest election. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. I don't know what's going to happen. But the big money people are betting on Donald. I told you about Polymarket. And now that Kamala's come in, even with the mainstream media standing up behind her as though she's the greatest candidate of all time, it's so fake, it's so fraud, it's bad. Polymarket is going further and further and further towards Donald. More and more bets that Donald's going to make it, despite possible threats of more assassinations. Despite all the support that Kamala is getting. So when you do things like follow the money is really blunt. It's really, it's like a blunt instrument. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I didn't do a full show because I'm a little bit too jittery. I just wanted to get out these core notes that I had here today, because it's a lot to digest. It's a lot of violence simultaneously. Assassination a few weeks ago. Riots, civil war, murder. It made me a little bit uncomfortable. But anyway, we are loving, we are loved. Be loving, be loved. Own it first. You've got to own it first. You have to ask for the healing power of love to fill your body, your mind, your heart, and soul from above. Just say it like a bumper sticker mantra. I ask for the healing power of love to fill my body from up above. So on and so on and so on. Accept the infusion. Now you own it. Now you can be loving, be loved. It's physics. Basic physics. Okay. So I'm going to check out now and wish you all a super evening. Come back soon.